we have to understand and use the concept of settler colonialism. And it has three basic elements: the violent takeover of another people's country, again, taking their land, displacing them, and then remaking the country in the settler's own image; the pacification of the local population, that is, in other words, eliminating resistance to a point where the people cannot resist anymore. And that's what we certainly try to see in Gaza. That's what we're certainly seeing in the northern part of the West Bank as well. And the third element is then normalization. Once you've taken over the country and violently pacified the population, you get to a point of normalizing everything. And then Israel, for example, becomes a great country to come visit. Tel Aviv is a pink-friendly city. You've got beaches, you've got biblical sites. Christians want to come visit. In other words, normalization buries, not only buries, but it erases everything that's happened before, all the violence before, all the suffering before, um, and it becomes a new place where you start. All right, now we start here. Israel has gone through two stages of normalization. One was in 1947, when the UN partitioned Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And here the Zionist Jews, who were in the country maybe the vast majority, maybe 20 years, got 56% of Palestine. And the Palestinians were left with 42% of their own country. So, in other words, the UN itself normalized Zionism, normalized this Jewish claim to the country, and actually gave, with no authority, more than half of Palestine to the Jews. And then you had the Nakba. Then you had the war in 1948, where Israel then took half the land allocated to the Palestinians by the UN and conquered it. Well, in international law, and by that time there was some international law, conquering a territory, acquiring territory by force is illegal. You can't do that. But again, what happens? You create facts on the ground. So now Israel expands from 56% to 78% of the country, right? But that becomes normalized. That was kind of a second normalization. You know, the first one was normalizing in general the Jews' claim to Palestine and giving them more than half the country. The second one was now 78% of the country belongs to Israel. And you know how powerful normalization is? Look, 1993, we begin the Oslo peace process. And where does Arafat and the PLO begin the negotiations? Not with 1947, not with the partition plan. That's still valid. No one has ever, it doesn't have a statute of limitations. The UN resolution giving Palestinians, even that was, of course, outrageous, but nevertheless, giving Palestinians 42% of Palestine is still in force. But normalization played its role. And even Arafat internalized the idea that Israel is on 78% of Palestine. So we begin the negotiations in Oslo with 78% versus 22%. Now the Palestinians are trying to negotiate how much of the 22% that remains, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, can they retain? So that's the power of normalization. And now we're entering into the third and final phase of normalization, because in 1967, of course, Israel conquered the rest of Palestine. It's controlled all of Palestine from that time. And now the task of Zionism is to normalize not the 56%, not the 78%, but the 100% control that Israel has over the country. Nonetheless, of course, you've got a large Palestinian population. Half the population of this country today is Palestinian. What do you do with them? Well, one of the answers is what Netanyahu and Trump are pushing on us: a forcible displacement, forcible transfer, which is illegal in international law, of course, and that's what they're trying to do in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. Apartheid is what you finally do. Israel's not going to get rid of the 7 million Palestinians already living in Palestine. And therefore, the only way out for Israel is to confine them to little islands in a Bantustan, just like South Africa. We'll call that Bantustan a state, right? Even though it's non-viable, it's non-sovereign, it has no territorial integrity, no borders with any Arab country. We'll call it a state. We'll give it some collaborationist president like Abu Mazen or someone. And that's it. We have the two-state solution. Israel has control of 100% of Palestine, but de facto is 85% of Palestine because you want to leave 15% or so in little islands for the Palestinian population that you don't want to give, of course, citizenship to, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. And it's over. That's normalization. And then you normalize with the international community, you normalize with the Arab world, which is what the Abraham Accords were all about. And the jewel in the crown, of course, now is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is very willing to do this today. It wants some kind of a pathway to a Palestinian state. All this stuff we've heard for years, but effectively, the United States, the Arab governments, not the Arab peoples, but the Arab governments, and much of the international community, Europe is submissive in all of this, is in the process of finally normalizing Zionism, Israel, and on all of Palestine, and transforming Palestine into a Jewish country. So this is the danger. And we see it today as the final push, and we see all these three elements in play. The violent dispossession. We see it in Gaza, making Gaza uninhabitable and trying to push the people out. But we also see it in the West Bank, where Israel has released the settlers, the violent settlers, to attack Palestinian communities at will, with the intent of driving them off their lands and even driving a lot of the people out of the country completely that just can't stand it anymore. And in fact, the Israeli army has created a new unit called Desert Frontier, which is a unit of these violent settler youth that now have army uniforms, authority, weapons, and go in to forcibly displace Palestinian populations. So displacement, taking of the land, ethnic cleansing is going on now, but this is the final push for Israel to get Palestinians out, and certainly in the West Bank, in anticipation of normalization, to create the facts on the ground that it wants.